What is going on here?
I'm repeating myself, and I'm going to have to say it again. I understand that sounds horrible.
Adam Neumann, the infamous CEO behind the company WeWork, was set to revolutionize the industry of working. Instead, fueled by greed and delusion, Adam led his company from a modest startup to a multi-billion-dollar company, and then suddenly watched everything crash down around him. From allegations of horribly mistreating staff to genuine startup tunnel vision, Adam fell into the trap of the cultish obsession with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. He was on top of the world, and then he crashed. Hard. Now he's trying to claw his way back to success. But will it work in his favor, and has he really learned from his mistakes? Adam Neumann is from Tel Aviv, Israel, but only lived there for a short time before he and his family moved to the United States once his parents got divorced and his mother wanted to do her medical residency overseas. Then, after 4 years, they moved back to Israel, where he would live until he finished his mandatory military training with the Israeli Naval Academy. Once his conscription was completed, he decided to go to New York City to attend business school. Adam had always known that he wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he got his start by creating a clothing line for kids. The company itself flopped, and he abandoned it within a few years. In 2008, Adam noticed a niche on the heels of the stock market crash that left millions of people with job insecurity who were turning towards entrepreneurship as a form of stability. He and a colleague created the company Green Desk, which was a shared workspace business focused on sustainability. Basically, what that means is that they are glorified landlords who rent office spaces to individuals rather than leasing to whole companies, allowing business owners to work from an office instead of at home on their own companies. He had 2 buildings in New York that were doing exceptionally well, and he wanted to expand outwards, so he found investors with extremely deep pockets. By 2010, they had rebranded as WeWork, and because Neumann fit the bill of a quirky, driven visionary with a gift for salesmanship who would bring in millions for them all, investors practically lined up to give him money. His quirky personality kept investors from asking too many questions and fostered a tunnel vision of sorts that cared more about stock price increases rather than balance sheet results. On the heels of Apple revolutionizing business, it seemed that investors were more concerned with knowing that their stock was going up rather than seeing genuine profit increases on paper that pertain specifically to a rising success of the company. By the way, when I say quirky behavior, I mean it. Adam was an extremely lavish person, and despite touting sustainability, he went on tons of private jet flights. One of which he and his friends were doing so much, leafy green stuff, while inside of a plane that the flight crew had to don oxygen masks just to continue working because of all of the smoke. Neumann became known for his excess and, well, his greed, honestly, and it only kept escalating. He became convinced that death was a technical issue that would be solved with time and science, and so he invested heavily in startup life science companies. He also continued to collect millions of dollars from investors to open up different WeWork offices around the world. He became a sort of Marie Antoinette-like figure, ordained with wealth and spending money like he breathes air, all while his company begins to show signs of crumbling around him. He would leave employees to clean up the mess he had created, and continually abandoned other staff members who were starting to notice inconsistencies in the company itself. He was often completely impossible to get a hold of. Quote, sometimes he would abandon them upon landing at an airport for meetings, leaving staffers to find their own way home. This mirrored his behavior on land, too. Adam would meet with staff and even interview prospective employees while riding around in his super luxury car costing more than $200,000. Then, when he was done, tell them to get out and ride in a separate car in his convoy. All of these insane and wasteful details in Adam and his wife's life are so hypocritical when you look at the business they had built themselves as. The WeWork company was founded on the principles of environmentalism and sustainability. Meanwhile, the CEO and his wife lived in a multi-million-dollar mega mansion, all while touting eco-friendly lifestyles to which they were not holding themselves accountable for. The Neumanns also treated their employees like serfs. The office was routinely trashed from weekend parties, and employees would come in on Monday morning expecting to pick up after the CEO and his friends. Everyone had the expectation of having to clean up for Adam and his friends, whether it be hop on a flight at a moment's notice to meet him where he is, or to work insane hours at a time just to make up for the slack of an absentee CEO. Then in 2018, cracks in the company definitely started to show. WeWork faced a lawsuit from a former employee who identified issues of inappropriate behavior specifically to the women in the office by both Adam and other employees. In her lawsuit statement, she accused Newman of plying her, quote, with shots during her interview with the company. Shortly after the lawsuit came to light, WeWork created a policy that its employees could only drink 4 beers per day at the office instead of the unlimited amount previously. I love how that's just a normal thing to say for this company instead of completely insane. I would literally never get any work done. Then in August 2019, his extravagant lifestyle and greed finally caught up to him. WeWork attempted to become an IPO, which basically means opening their stock to the public to drive up value. WeWork directors were extremely concerned about Newman's lifestyle looking bad on the company if it went public, and they were planning on asking him to step down as CEO, quote, after a tumultuous week in which his eccentric behavior and substance use came to light. After Adam got wind of this planned takedown, he took $700 million out of the company, and basically, by staging a coup, the directors kicked him out as CEO and replaced him. But not really staging a coup, because they let him keep the money and paid him $192 million cash to walk away. While that is an insane amount of money, after he stepped down, Newman was dropped from the Forbes billionaire list. For the rest of 2019 and basically up until now, WeWork has tried and kind of failed a little bit to recover from its reputation as a hypocritical greenwashing company that allows its greed-driven CEOs to run off the rails. Meanwhile, Adam is attempting to make a comeback to the entrepreneurial world. In 2022, he started buying apartment buildings in New York, and it's estimated that he owns approximately $1 billion worth of real estate in his some 4,000 apartments. For an interview done in March 2022, he also expressed wanting to rejoin the business side. Quote, to be an entrepreneur, you have to regularly make decisions on the spot. And to be successful, you have to, over time, make more right decisions than you did wrong, actually a lot more right. And the higher the growth of the business, the faster you move, the tougher it is to do. But the longer you practice, just like surfing over time, the better you get at it. So you fall on surfing and then you get up and do it again, and you just do it a little bit better. Adam states he plans on shifting to residential sectors rather than commercial. The median age of a homebuyer in the US has grown from 31 in the 80s to now almost 50 years old. He is attempting to make home building more accessible to young people who are so often pushed out by an impossible market. Although it seems to just be in the talking stages, and I can't quite seem to find a direction that Adam specifically wants to head in, it's just that it's kind of an idea he's hoping to achieve. Quote, we started by buying this real estate, and then I started walking the buildings, just feeling, and it feels like there's so much more that could be done to make tenants' lives better. In regards to his previous scandals, Adam stated about this new direction, quote, I think what's beautiful about the new story is that it is a progression and a consequence of the old story. I don't know if it's a model, but a thought that guided me is that if we take everything that happened as a lesson and we celebrate the great, we learn from whatever it is we can learn from, and then apply it as we move forward into the future, then it's extremely beneficial. That being said, there has been no improvement when it comes to Adam's lifestyle. He still lives extravagantly and prioritizes fun over business, which I think, for someone attempting to be back at the helm of such a large corporation, is not a good thing. I think that as long as Adam continues to be as greedy and selfish as we've seen him in the past, this new business is just as likely to crash and burn as his others, no matter how persuasive he can be.
If we can all come together and be in a true state of unity and then the world will be in a beautiful place. And not only that, but that is the true reality. We just can't see it.
Rebecca Newman is the free-wielding yoga teacher who had an equal part in the downfall of the WeWork company owned and operated by herself and her husband, Adam Newman. She and him created a cult-like work environment together that had employees thinking they were witnessing a true turn in business. That was until they found themselves out of a job and their stock options worthless after the couple would let the company burn around them due to frivolous spending and a party lifestyle that went against the supposed values of the company they created. Rebecca touted herself as an eco-warrior, yet taking private planes, partying till dawn, and trashing the WeWork offices after parties meant that the employees they hired were the ones left to pick up the pieces. Rebecca is a daughter of Evelyn and Bob Paltrow. She grew up in New York attending a fancy prep school. She went on to attend Cornell University for Business and Buddhism, although she would later work as a yoga instructor. You may recognize her maiden name. That's because she's the cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow. After she graduated from college, Rebecca entered a business trading company that would later rebrand to Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Although she became a business owner through her husband, Rebecca has always been in wealthy circles. Going only to prestigious schools and spending insane amounts of money throughout her childhood on vacations, Rebecca was born with a silver spoon shoved into her mouth. Adam only gave her the ticket to owning the business. They met right before Adam created WeWork and got married the same year the trademark was acquired. Although the business was in her husband's name, Rebecca had equal weight in the decision-making surrounding the company. She hired and fired people based off of their vibes. She fired a mechanic for the WeWork private jet within minutes of meeting him because she didn't like his energy. One person who interviewed for a position within the company stated, quote, "I got the sense that she was guiding the company through her astrological intuition." During the interview, they almost solely discussed his birth sign to see if he was compatible with the company. He was not. Adam Neumann and his business partner grew the company from one office in downtown Manhattan to 12,500 employees over 29 countries with more than 500,000 paying customers ranging from independent freelancers to huge corporations, all while they burned through billions of dollars in investors' money. By 2019, Rebecca started calling herself a co-founder, she wasn't, and the company had started to pivot from renting out desks to attempting a grandiose vision of, quote, elevating the world's consciousness through other ventures like a co-living environment called We Live, a school called We Grow, and a fitness center called Rise by We. Seems very culty to me, down to the names, to be honest. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, back in 2017, Rebecca had named herself as a founder of a company called We Grow, which was the school I had mentioned above, with the mission of, quote, unleashing every human's superpowers. Rebecca stated that her intentions with the school was to create a space where children's spirits were just as nurtured as their minds, with classes on meditation and mindfulness, farming, and entrepreneurship. Launching a for-profit private school in the hyper-competitive New York City market was highly unusual, particularly for someone with no background in childhood education. Rebecca nevertheless succeeded in convincing wealthy parents to enroll their children in the school, which charged between $22,000 and $42,000 for tuition depending on age. To Amanda Uri, founder of Manhattan Private School Advisors, the whole thing seemed like a vanity project started by a woman who was so privileged she didn't really have to worry about typical concerns like positioning her kids for acceptance into top universities. Quote, very wealthy parents are often more relaxed about where their kids get into college because they know those same kids will always be financially well off, thanks to them. Indeed, Rebecca has said that she doesn't even know if her kids will go to college. That being said, We Grow only had 46 students, 4 of which were Rebecca and Adam's own children. Rebecca is a delusional yogi who, because of the wealth and idealized world she has lived in, believes in the most insane things with basically zero proof because she's never had to fight for her own opinion. She believes that eating sad animals will make you sad because you absorb their energy. She also believes that the secret to living forever is having a flexible spine. Rebecca has claimed to be a vegetarian since she was 12, but a person who worked closely with her said that for a period of time she ate red meat once a week because a doctor told her that her, quote, body needed it, and said she would close her eyes while doing it. Girl, just take iron pills and omega-3s, that's what I do, it's really not hard. She banned meat consumption in her office despite this, because for some reason that's more eco-friendly than, say, taking a private jet all across the world basically all of the time. The Neumanns had 6 kids, and each child had a nanny as well, but they called them minders. I guess that's not to seem as privileged as they are. I mean, hell, she and Adam got $1 million as a wedding gift from Rebecca's parents. As the company's valuation soared, so did the Neumanns' dreams. Adam said he wanted to build a WeWork on Mars and be president of the world. He wanted to solve the problem of hunger and help orphans find families. In a 2018 business conference, Rebecca stated, quote, we want to create a whole we world where everybody is unified and happy and together. Since they were pushed out of their business at the end of 2019 in a sort of employee coup, the Neumanns have been downsizing. They sold at least 3 of their 6 homes. a California estate, a Westchester mansion, and a Hamptons farmhouse for a reported total of $27 million. Their 6-bedroom Gramercy Park apartment has been on the market since last year for $37.5 million. They hunkered down in Tel Aviv for a few months in 2020 before returning to the Hamptons. As federal and state investigators reportedly examine the Newmans' business dealings, they're living their lives with their 6 children and support staff while hatching plans for their next ventures. For Adam, there's a new business he hopes to create that, quote, involves what's happening in the world because of the big thing that happened in March 2020. He's also been investigated in various startups tied to the real estate world. In late April, he was spotted in Miami at an impromptu industry confab called Miami Tech Week, at a party held at the Venetian Island mansion of a financier who was pardoned by Donald Trump for his involvement in the Varsity Blues college admissions scandal. Rebecca, meanwhile, appears to have the goal of creating another educational project out of the ashes of We Grow, the rights to which she purchased when it closed. The new endeavor is called Soulful, spelled S-O-L-F-L, an acronym that means Student of Life for Life. The Soulful Instagram account contains a link to the website featuring images of a surfer riding a wave, a bounty of fresh figs, and a forum where you can, quote, be the first to know about what's happening with the project. According to a person familiar with the matter, she's taken over a building in New York to school her kids along with the children of a few other families and has been reaching out to former WeWork employees to join the venture. Meanwhile, WeWork is finally having its IPO through a special purpose acquisition company. In order to settle litigation with the founder and go public in February, the company agreed to give Adam an enhanced stock award worth $245 million. A former friend of the situation stated, quote, they don't think they've done anything wrong. They think everybody loves them. In this age of heist story after heist story being aired on various streaming platforms, the WeWork scandal seems to be a sad irregularity that is much more reflective of the current economy we live in. The Newmans aren't behind bars. Worst thing that could happen to them is they get arrested for tax evasion or something and have to spend a few years in rich person prison. Really, the moral of the story is not that the good guys win and the bad guys get their comeuppance. In fact, Adam and Rebecca are still worth millions of dollars, are still living in their own version of a utopic reality where money is liquid and everyone is filled with love and wants to do yoga and eat celery. Meanwhile, the employees they scammed out of money and time are left to foreclose their homes and pick up the pieces, just as they have always done for the Newmans. The rich get richer off the back of the employee.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Notorious scammer Elizabeth Holmes was once the youngest self-made female billionaire. Then, in the blink of an eye, her company was worthless and she lost it all, being heralded as, quote, the next Steve Jobs, to now finding herself facing serious criminal charges and decades in prison. Elizabeth Holmes was considered a hero, but when investors started to catch on that she built her empire almost entirely based on a lie, that lie found Elizabeth guilty of 4 out of 11 charges of fraud, wherein she could face up to 20 years in prison when she is officially sentenced. And now the Hulu series The Dropout, based on a podcast detailing the case, is widely spreading Holmes' lies and deception, giving it more publicity than ever. Elizabeth Holmes was born to be a fraudster. Her own dad went bankrupt after being accused of an accounting fraud scandal where they, using accounting loopholes, hid billions of dollars in debt from failed projects and dealings. Elizabeth came from some seriously old money. Her third great-grandfather founded the world's biggest yeast production company, and both her parents were involved in congressional politics and international trade. Holmes herself was creating and selling program-based businesses while she was still in high school. She learned how to speak Mandarin Chinese, and only partway through high school did she already begin attending Stanford University's summer Mandarin program. When she graduated high school, she attended Stanford, where she studied chemical engineering and worked as a student researcher and lab assistant in the School of Engineering, all within her freshman year. Her interests lay in laboratory research and medical engineering, and by the end of her freshman year, she was studying SARS. This laboratory research involving SARS sparked an interest in collection of blood samples through the use of syringes. She filed her first patent for an invention she had created, which was a wearable drug delivery patch, and a year later, she took the plunge and decided to drop out of university and use her tuition money to fund her consumer healthcare technology company. The name of this company was Real Time Cures, set to, quote, democratize healthcare. The beginning of her company, she would later state, was inspired by her fear of needles, wherein she became interested in performing blood tests using only a minute amount of blood. When she first proposed the idea to a professor at Stanford, he said it was impossible, but she eventually convinced him to back her idea. She later renamed the company Theranos, a combo of the words therapy and diagnosis. A year after the creation of the company, it had raised $6 million in funding before even releasing a product or prototype. By the end of 2010, she had $92 million. By the end of 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion and had raised more than $400 million in venture capital. Elizabeth was on top of the world. She featured on Forbes magazine as the world's youngest female self-made billionaire, and she featured on the Forbes 400. She was praised for, quote, this phenomenal rebooting of laboratory medicine, for her revolutionary idea of only using a few drops of blood in lab testing. But that's exactly what it was, just an idea. In 2015, a Wall Street journalist was tipped off about the fishiness of the whole operation. A medical expert who thought the experiments were off asked him to speak to a few ex-employees who became eventually whistleblowers. It wouldn't be long, however, before Elizabeth found out about the probe into her company, and she decided to launch a campaign to stop the journalist from publishing his findings. She threatened him legally and financially, but despite her threats, the journalist published the piece. He detailed the company's experiments, how the prototype they were touting around gave extremely inaccurate results, and how the results they had been promoting that came from the prototype actually came from commercially available blood sample machines. Elizabeth Holmes denied all the accusations and called the Wall Street Journal a tabloid. She appeared on television the night that article was posted and stated, quote, this is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. Then the trouble really started for Holmes. In 2016, a few months after the article was published, Elizabeth was caught operating a lab that had faulty equipment and used unsafe procedures. The findings meant that she was banned for 2 years from owning, operating, or directing a blood testing service. Although Theranos appealed the decision, Walgreens terminated their relationship with the company, and the FDA ordered the company to cease making its blood collecting device because it was both dangerous and didn't work. Then the lawsuits started cropping up. Elizabeth's company was ordered to repay all the consumers who bought all of her products in the state of Arizona under false pretenses that they actually worked. She ended up having to shell out $4.65 million to Arizona alone. 99% of Theranos shareholders basically partially backed out, and in 2018, both Holmes and her former president Ramesh Balwani were officially charged with fraud. Now, something to know about Ramesh. Her and Elizabeth had an epic love affair. He is 20 years her senior, and the two had met while she was in college at Stanford. Their relationship was super toxic, however, and Balwani was known as a bully around the office, often tracking his employees' whereabouts and outing them if he deemed them to be too unproductive. Eventually, he and Elizabeth broke up in 2016 when the company was starting to downturn and got into legal trouble, and she pushed him out of the presidential position. A lot of people, once the case had garnered insane media attention, were shocked as to why it had been allowed to go on for so long. A lot of it had to do with how obsessed Elizabeth was with security. She had security guards stay with each visitor throughout the entire time that they were in the Theranos building, and they even reportedly escorted them to bathrooms. She also only signed deals with companies on the condition that they absolutely do not reveal any information about the deal with anyone else. That means that she got to rack up an insane amount of money because companies weren't talking to each other about how much they were giving Elizabeth. So by 2018, Elizabeth and Balwani, along with the company as a whole, were charged with massive fraud by the SEC, and she had to agree to give up financial and voting control of the company, pay $500,000, and return almost 20 million shares of Theranos stock. She also isn't allowed to be a director of any publicly traded company for a whole decade. Despite all this, she stayed CEO of Theranos because it's a private company, but only a few months later, she would step down as CEO on the same day that she and Balwani were charged with 9 counts of wire wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. All while her company is burning around her, Elizabeth is on social media touting her new boyfriend and new puppy. She's now dating the heir to a fancy hospitality company. And author Nick Bilton posted about it on Twitter, stating, quote, "I personally find it crazy that she's being charged with 11 felony counts, thousands of people's lives were harmed, and she's as happy as can be." Now, after being charged in January and facing up to 20 years in prison, we're not sure when she'll be officially sentenced, but it seems pretty likely that she'll face some amount of jail time, at least if just to prove a point. Her and her boyfriend Will Evans used to live in a $5,000 a month apartment in San Francisco. Although no one's sure where they live now, I can't imagine it's going to be a normal apartment. It's been reported that she and her boyfriend got married in 2019, but no one's really sure because the wedding was allegedly super private, which is very on brand for Elizabeth. Her trials only took so long too because of the worldwide thingy that happened in 2020. Otherwise, she would have been sentenced way sooner given how serious fraud charges are taken in the US. And in 2021, Elizabeth also gave birth to a baby with her boyfriend, so there's that too, I guess. So as it stands now, she's facing 20 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, and is required to possibly pay each and every one of her victims restitution, which could add up to millions of dollars. But we won't know what her actual penalty will be yet until the sentencing, which hasn't been set.
We have been working on something that we are very excited to share with you, and something that we believe is magical. That's going to improve the quality of care.
Ramesh Balwani, known more commonly according to his nickname Sunny, is the former president and COO of Theranos, who founded the company with his then-girlfriend Elizabeth Holmes. The company was built on a lie with the promise to revolutionize science. Starting in 2015, Theranos came under intense media criticism due to its questionable claims and practices. Eventually, they were ruined, with both Sunny and Elizabeth charged by the FBI for operating the business as a Ponzi scheme to defraud investors and patients. And now, the trial against Sunny that will likely see him in jail is underway. Ramesh was born in Pakistan before they moved to India due to religious persecution. Eventually, however, he and his family moved to the United States, where Sunny finished high school and entered into university in Austin, Texas. He began working for companies like Microsoft in the 90s and created a software development company that was purchased by a different company. This purchasing gave him $6 million in stock, which he held onto until he sold them for a cool $40 million, effectively making Sunny an extremely wealthy man. After he did so, he went back to school and got a master's degree in business at UC Berkeley in 2003. While at Berkeley, he met Elizabeth Holmes at the time, who was 18 years old and in her senior year of high school. She pursued an undergraduate degree at Stanford in chemical engineering but didn't complete it, instead choosing to drop out to focus on her new company, Theranos, full-time. A year after she started the company, Sunny joined and ran the day-to-day operations as its president. Although the company was a biomedical one, he had no training in biological sciences or medical devices. This became an issue due to the absence of medical experts on the company's board of directors. The company itself is a blood testing corporation, so not having any doctors on board made it difficult. Additionally, Sunny's behavior while working became infamous as he was extremely difficult to work with. He created such a toxic work environment that he became described by former Theranos employees as overbearing, uncompromising, and so concerned about industrial espionage that he verged on paranoia. Sunny became known as someone who used technical terms he didn't understand to appear more knowledgeable about medical science than he actually was. At one point, he misheard the term end effector, which is basically the claw device at the end of a machine, and he thought it was actually called endofactor, which isn't a word. He repeated the error and used it as a term throughout meetings and didn't notice when an employee used the word endofactor instead of end effector to make fun of him during their PowerPoint presentation. Then a Wall Street journalist decided to do some extra digging, and using a whistleblower in October 2015, he found that the blood testing device that the company had touted as a miracle scientific marvel provided inaccurate medical diagnosis and results. The machine frequently failed quality control checks and provided widely varying results, a finding that was corroborated in a report released in March 2016 by a federal science industry. In 2016, Theranos told regulators it had voided all test results from the machines from 2014 and 2015, as well as some other tests it ran on conventional machines. The Wall Street Journal article that exposed the company also found that the company was lying to patients and was more often than not using using a traditional blood testing machine that was already commercially available rather than the one that they had created. In 2016, as the company was starting to crash and burn under the weight of the expose article, Elizabeth and Sunny were sent a warning letter after the CMS, basically the feds of lab safety, found that their lab in California was operating a horribly illegal blood testing lab. They also slapped Sunny specifically with a 2-year ban from owning or operating a blood lab after he refused to fix the problems related to the lab itself. They also decided to charge Theranos with fraud because they claimed that the US Department of Defense used their company's technology despite that just being a blatant lie. They also claimed to having a revenue stream of an estimated $100 million despite only making a total of $100,000 the year it was published in 2014. So in 2018, Sunny and Elizabeth were charged by the SEC with securities fraud for, quote, raising more than $700 million from investors through an elaborate years-long fraud in which they exaggerated or made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. Elizabeth decided to settle the case out of court without admitting or denying wrongdoing, but Sunny was still in litigation in 2019, following an investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco that lasted more than 2 years. A federal grand jury indicated President Ramesh Balwani and Elizabeth Holmes on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Prosecutors allege that Holmes and Balwani engaged in 2 criminal schemes, one to defraud investors and another to defraud patients. In March 2020, they decided that Sunny will try separately from Elizabeth, who in January of this year was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud. Sunny's trial began in March of this year with jury selection, but it keeps getting delayed. More on that later. As for his love life, Sunny interestingly used to be married to a Japanese artist before they got divorced in 2002. He was still married to her when he met Elizabeth in university, who was 18 years old and 19 years younger than him. He and her began dating once Sunny got divorced, although they didn't disclose their romantic relationship when he was brought onto Theranos as a president. During her trial, Elizabeth claims that she sought comfort in Sunny after someone came onto her without her consent. Their relationship lasted more than a decade. Elizabeth claims that he was a very controlling person and he would regularly harm her throughout their relationship. Despite this testimony, she also stated that he had, quote, not forced her to make false statements to investors, business partners, journalists, and company directors that have been described in the case. Although Sunny has denied the claims that he hurt Elizabeth, and he has accused her of slander and being inflammatory. Now back onto what's happening in the trial. As it stands literally right now, literally in the days we are currently in, we'll be deciding what happens to Sunny. Elizabeth was found guilty of fraud, but because Sunny is being tried separately, his was delayed to around now because of illness and having difficulty finding a proper jury. His defense so far was that he made no profit off of Theranos and so had no say in the fraud that took place. But as was revealed yesterday at the time of writing this, jurors reportedly saw texts from Sunny to Elizabeth that stated, quote, I am responsible for everything at Theranos, which basically runs exactly contrary to the defense that he was merely an investor in the company and not the literal chief of operations. Sunny is charged with 10 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He's pleaded not guilty to all 12 counts. As of right now, it's still unclear whether or not Elizabeth will testify at Sunny's trial, but if she does, we can't expect her to give any positive testimonies considering how hateful she is towards him now. And while Sunny faces decades in prison if he is convicted of fraud, he isn't currently in prison, nor is he in police custody. While Elizabeth has moved on from Sunny and is currently pregnant with her first baby with her new husband, which girl, you move on way too fast, it seems that Sunny has no interest in doing the same. He and Elizabeth sold their mansion in California that they own together for $15.8 million just last month. Either way, as the trial is still ongoing, there really isn't much I'm able to say, mostly because there isn't much being released. In such a high-profile case, it's unlikely that they'll release tons of details and evidence to the public while the judgment is still ongoing. I'd say once he is sentenced, which he definitely will be, that's when there will be more information to dissect about what exactly is going on in the courtroom. I predict that he will be found guilty and that Elizabeth will testify, but that's just my 2 cents.